We have a draft proposed revision to GMCB Rule 3.0, which is our hospital budget review rule. And we've also noticed a potential executive session to discuss attorney-client communications regarding rulemaking for board member for-cause removal. Before we turn to those, I'll start with a motion, and I move to approve the minutes of October 15th, 2025.
Second.
All in favor of the motion, say aye.
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 Aye. And the minutes are approved. I'll also move to approve the minutes from October 22nd, 2025.
Second.
All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Sorry, I think that was me. Aye.
And then the care board has large group filings that come in out of cadence with our general small group and individual group orders. So I did want to announce that the Green Mountain Care Board has made a decision with regard to MVP Health Plan's large group HMO. On November 3rd, the Green Mountain Care Board issued its decision on MVP Health Plan's large group HMO rate filing, which covers employers with over 100 employees. In the filing, MVP proposed an annual average rate increase of 5.9% for accounts that renew in the first quarter of 2026. GMCB did modify the filing, and we required adjustments that reduced the rate increase to approximately 1.9% for first quarter 2026 renewals. The board's adjustments reflect the final fiscal year 26 hospital budget decisions and the financial impact of newly enacted legislation, specifically Act 55. That's pretty consistent with the published opinions we had in the small group and large group, where there were significant reductions, including in connection with the board's decisions on hospital budgets and with the legislation passed in Act 55. With the large groups, the rate changes reflect the revenue increase for a fully manually rated group. Some groups will experience higher increases and some will experience lower increases based on their specific claims experience, which differs from the small and individual markets. With that, I will turn to Mark Hengstler for a presentation relating to a proposed revisions to Green Mountain Care Board Rule 3.0.
Everybody, I've got slides. Let me pull those up for you. All right, so today we're talking about a draft proposed revision to GMCB Rule 3, which is the hospital budget review rule. I have, I think, the unenviable task of paraphrasing rules in a meeting, which is not that exciting, but it's really important stuff. So what I'm going to do is do a little background, walk you through the history of the rule that we have and the timeline for what we're looking at for a revision. And then I'm just going to go through the draft proposed rule by section and explain what I consider to be any material revisions between what currently is in Rule 3 and what is in this draft proposal for Rule 3. As a starting point, I'm just going to do a little history. So this is a rule that the board has had since 2013. And really, there have been a number of minor amendments to the board's budget review statute and oversight since 2013, but nothing major that required revision to the rule. The rule was adopted in 2013. As I understand it, well before my time, it was mostly ported over from BISCA. So in effect, this is a rule that's been in existence in some form for quite some time. Last year, we had significant amendments to the board's budget review authorities. So we had Act 49, we had Act 62, Act 68, all of these touched on the board's budget review authorities and statute and the process for reviewing budgets and dealing with deviations from budgets. So it's time to make some changes to the rule to align the Rule 3 with what's now in statute. And this proposed revision, to be clear, it's it's doing a little bit of lifting in a few areas. It's responding to those amendments first, but considering how long the time has gone since the rule as it is and the changes to health policy and financing since then, the rule also attempts to describe the current budget review process more completely, and I do think it simplifies some parts of the board's process. So I'll go over what each of those changes are. A little bit on timeline. This will look really familiar to what you saw with the ACO revised rule that the board looked at, I think, a few weeks ago now. So staff posted this draft proposed rule on Monday, shared it with hospitals and the HCA, and opened a public comment period. We're discussing the rule today, and then there's going to be a public comment period open until November 17th. The board, we have a proposed vote for the board for the proposed rule on November 19th, which is 2 Wednesdays from today. And if the board votes to approve the proposed rule, what that will trigger is not a new rule immediately. It'll trigger the rulemaking process. So what that'll mean is if the board votes yes to whatever the proposed rule looks like on the 19th, staff will go through rulemaking. This process takes some months. That process actually is going to include a future board meeting later where the rule will be discussed again after notice of the rule goes out in newspapers of record. And then the goal with the timeline that we're working on is that we have a effective date for the revised rule by July 1st, which would, to be clear, mean that the revised rule wouldn't apply to guidance formation for hospital budget guidance in March, but would apply to the board's regulatory review in July through October. So that's a little bit on the timeline. And what I'll do now is I'll just start going through parts of the rule, and I'll just flag the stuff that really seems meaningful, but I will go section by section just so everybody is clear about what's in here. I will also add that for anybody who wants to follow along at home, the board's website has 2 versions of the proposed rule that you can look at. The first version is just a clean copy that looks like how it would be published if it was adopted as is, and the second version has tracked changes with the current rule. So you can use that document to look at differences between what is currently in rule and what's proposed in this draft revision. Okay, so the board's hospital budget rule starts with a general provisions section, and walking through the section 3.101 identifies the board's statutory rulemaking authority. 3.102 describes the purpose of the rule, and there's been some revision there to align the description of the rule with the construction of the board's statutes. No material differences, in my opinion, in either of these sections, but some clarifications throughout. Section 3.103 adds or clarifies definitions to a number of important terms in the budget process. So as an example, there's now a definition for benchmarks, which is not specifically defined in current rule. There's a more clear and consistent definition for budget guidance. And there's also a definition for significant budget deviations. I'm going to get to those later. We'll get to budget deviations at section, I think, 3.4. So I'll talk more about those when we get there. And then finally, section 3.104 identifies the entities that are subject to the rule and makes some tweaks to statutory revisions. Nothing particularly potent in this portion. Moving on to section 3.2. So this is a section that details the process and manner by which the board establishes guidance and hospital duties with regard to budget submissions. So just walking through each section. Section 3.201 and 202 explain hospital duties in reference to both the Uniform Reporting Manual and hospital budget guidance. The current rule identifies accurately these documents, but the rule just clarifies the difference in how these documents are used. So the Uniform Reporting Manual is a generally more static document that contains many definitions and accounting principles for hospital reporting year over year. And then the budget guidance is a document that is adopted each year and that contains many requirements or either for reporting or for benchmarking that are specific to that year that the board is looking at. Section 3.203 is a section that concerns benchmarks. So under current rule, benchmarks are explained as being used by the board in a few different ways. And under this revised proposal, Section 3.203 states that the board may use benchmarks to exempt hospitals from hearings and must obtain input from hospitals and the HCA before it sets benchmarks. I'll just briefly break each of these down. So in the board's budget statute, there's a description of the board's authority to set benchmarks. And if the board sets benchmarks, it may use those to waive certain review processes that it uses in the hospital budget process. One of those review processes is the holding of a hearing and the solicitation of public comment. So what this rule simplifies is just the nature of how the board would use benchmarks. So under this proposed rule, the benchmarks would simply be used by the board to help make a determination as to whether or not it would waive one of these review processes, which is the holding of a hospital hearing. As to the second point, the current rule states that the board, when establishing benchmarks, will obtain feedback from hospitals, VAWS, and any other interested person. It's a paraphrase of the language, but that's roughly it. What we've done here is we've simply aligned the entities in the rule with the entities that have authorities or responsibilities in statute. So of course, that's hospitals, which are the regulated entities in this case, and then the HCA. The healthcare advocate has a number of authorities or duties in the hospital budget process under 9456 D, I think 3A and B. So that part of the rule just aligns with what's in statute. Section 3.204 states that the board will set comparison metrics and peer groups in the hospital budget guidance. This is what the board already does. This would just codify that practice in rule. Again, that's consistent with the board's statutory criteria for establishing budgets, which includes the evaluation of indicators and metrics and hospital peer groups. And then section 3.205 explains hospital filing duties and identifies the effect of noncompliance with filing requirements. So that's the scope of this portion of the rule. Moving on to 3.3, this is the hospital budget review procedure section. There are 2 slides for this portion. So starting at the top, section 3.301 explains the board's process for sharing and making public non-confidential hospital submissions. No material change from the current rule in this section. However, section 3.302 explains the board's process for reviewing confidentiality requests. Now that process is currently, there has been in the last few years in the guidance document. What we've done is we've simply taken that process and ported it from the guidance document into rule. And the simplest reason for doing that is it's a static process. It's not one that we intend to make any significant changes to. And the value of having it in rule is that there's clarity and transparency in the best way that we can manage as to what the confidentiality process is. And then finally, section 3.303 states that the board will hold public hearings for all hospitals that are not exempted. And that does get into, again, that change from benchmark. So section 3.304, again, explains that the board may exempt any hospital at its discretion if that hospital meets benchmarks. Under current rule, there are limitations on the number of hospitals the board may exempt. It can exempt up to 4 hospitals. And there's also a limitation on the specific hospitals the board can exempt. The current rule places limits on exempting hospitals that are some of the highest NPR hospitals in the state. What we've done here is we've taken those specific conditions out of the rule and have just left this more open. So there's no limit on the number of hospitals that the board could theoretically exempt from budget hearings. The rule does contain similar language to the current rule, which states that if the board does exempt a hospital from a hearing, that hospital will not have its budget adjusted by the board, but still would be subject to standard conditions that are set for all hospitals. Section 3.305 identifies factors the board considers when reviewing budgets. No material change here. The current rule lists a number of factors that are in the statute. What we've done is we've pulled those out and we've just referenced to the parts of the statute that are relevant to the board's review. And the reason for doing that is if in the next few years there are tweaks or changes to what's in statute as to what the board needs to be looking at, we wouldn't need to make changes to the rule. The rule is just pointing to the statute. So if the statute gets amended, we don't have a conflict between what's in rule and what's in statute. Just simplifies the clarity of the document. And then section 3.306 identifies deadlines for establishing general hospital budgets and psychiatric hospital budgets. And this responds to one amendment from last year, which was specifying the different deadlines for those two types of hospitals. And I'm going to move finally to section 3.4, which is, I'd consider the section that has the largest changes from what's currently in the rule. And I'll handle this by talking first about mid-year reviews and how we do them now, and then I'll go to what happens if a hospital deviates from its budget. So as a starting point, in rule currently, a hospital may apply for an adjustment to its budget, but there's no process by which the board would intervene and take action if it believes that a hospital is going to deviate from its budget. And that was consistent with the statute prior to this last year, but there's a new authority in statute which allows the board to step in and make adjustments to commercial rate if a hospital is likely to significantly deviate from its budget that's been established. So what this section of the rule does is it conforms a new process around new board authority. So this is a process for a mid-year review. And the rule says that the board may conduct a mid-year review of hospital budgets. And that mid-year review would start with notice to any hospital that the board determines is likely to significantly deviate from its budget, meaning approximately 6 years of actuals are in, and based on projections and based on the budget, there's a likelihood that the hospital is going to go over its budget by a significant amount. The next step is a requirement that the hospital respond to the board with either of the following. Either one, an accounting that demonstrates a reasonable likelihood that the hospital will not significantly deviate from its budget. So maybe the hospital has information that the board doesn't have about what the second half of the budget year is going to look like for the hospital or is projected to look like for the hospital. Or two, a corrective action plan that explains the actions the hospital will take to ensure that no significant deviation occurs. Once the board gets that response back, there's then a board authority to, if the response is not adequate, adjust the commercial rates to ensure budget compliance, such that the hospital's year-end budget would align with the board's established budget order. And again, that points to new statutory authority. There's also language in here that clarifies, just for transparency purposes, that hospitals may independently, on their own initiative, reduce commercial rates without the board intervening for the purpose of complying with their budgets or preventing a significant deviation. I'm going to turn next to section 3.402, which describes the board's process for taking corrective measures. I'll back up and say that in the current rule, discussion of this process is described as enforcement. That's fine. The use of the word enforcement is in statute, but with the statutory changes that we had in the last year, there are more. I think the better description of this process is is either taking corrective measures or accounting for budget deviations. These are terms that are more widely used in the board's budget statute. So we've simply changed the terminology to align more closely with what's in 18 VSA 9456. So this process, again, does make changes from what's currently in rule. In current rule, when the board is conducting enforcement, there are a number of factors that the board considers and weighs against one another in determining what type of enforcement action to take, if any. And I guess a personal observation, being here for less than 2 years now, but coming up on it, is that that process typically requires a heavier lift from the board and board staff and a heavier lift from the hospitals in really digging into the details about all of these factors. It also is a process that leads to a little bit less predictability for hospitals, because there are, of course, different factors that the board is weighing and reviewing, and it's not just a more simple formula. This proposed revision does attempt a more simple formula. So this does attempt to simplify and streamline the board's process for dealing with significant deviations from hospital budgets. So here's what's in the proposed rule. If a hospital has significantly deviated from its budget, meaning the guidance document contains a description of what a significant deviation is. Right now, for this year's 1% deviation in total NPR. That's what the 25 guidance document included. If a hospital significantly deviates from its budget year closes out and it's over by more than 1% NPR in the case of last year, this new process would contain the following components. First, there would be board notice to any hospital that significantly deviated from its budget. That's consistent with what happens currently. Second, there would be an opportunity for the hospital to demonstrate that it could not have reasonably avoided the significant deviation. That would be the only factor before the board. That would be the question before the board, is whether the hospital could have taken reasonable action to avoid the deviation. Next, there is a general requirement that the board account for any significant deviation by amending the hospital's current year budget. That would be the corrective measure, would be an amendment to the current year budget. And that is consistent with language and statute, but which I can point to if needed for board members. And then finally, there is board discretion to refrain from taking action or to limit the corrective action if a hospital shows that it could not have reasonably avoided the significant deviation. So the overarching principle here is that we're hoping that under this rule, the mid-year adjustment can be a place where more budget deviation issues can be caught at an earlier stage. And then this corrective measure stage at the back end would be a more formulaic approach to managing significant deviations from budgets. And that takes us to the final portion of this section, which is the process for hospitals applying for budget adjustment. So under 9456 F1, a hospital may apply for an adjustment to its budget, which the board may grant upon a showing of need based on exceptional or unforeseen circumstances. And what this rule does with regard to that section is it puts some guardrails around how that budget application process is managed, which again is in line with the goal of dealing with budget adjustments and budget deviations mid-year and earlier on, rather than having as many of these spill over into corrective measures. So under current rule, the hospital may apply for budget adjustment at any time. There's really not much in rule that gets at this part of the statute. Under this proposed rule, there would be mid-year deadlines for applying for budget adjustments. So for general hospitals, the deadline would be April 1st, meaning if a hospital wants to seek an adjustment to its budget, an increase, for example, to its NPR cap or to its commercial rate cap, it would need to apply for that with the board by April 1st. And that date for psychiatric hospitals would be July 1st based on the calendar year budget year that they have. Second, there's clarification that if the board does account for a significant deviation, meaning it goes through that process in section 3.3, that's not a basis to apply for budget adjustment. So that simplifies and kind of streamlines the process so that we're not jumping between different types of budget adjustments for any given event that occurs. And then third, there's a requirement that the board identify how the budget adjustment, if it does agree to one, will be considered when comparing a hospital's budget against the next year's benchmarks. And just to explain that, if a hospital comes in for a mid-year application for adjustment, seeks an increase to its total NPR, and the board votes to approve that application, what gets issued is an amended budget order. That amended budget order changes the NPR cap from what it was previously to what the board voted on. What this would do is it would require in that amended budget order, it would require the board to include a determination, which again would be part of the vote, as to what number was being used for comparing the hospital's next year budget to the benchmarks. So if the benchmark is 3% NPR growth, the amended budget order would clarify if the hospital's original NPR is the figure that's the base, or if the amended NPR is the figure that's the base. So that's what that section does. And that's it for what's in the draft proposed hospital budget rule. For next steps, we have public comment going through the 17th again, proposed vote on the 19th, and then would hope to go through rulemaking process after that. I do have on here motion language proposed for the 19th. So that's just there for the purpose if anybody wanted to take a look at that ahead of time. But that covers it for me. Chair Foster, I believe the HCA is out today, but communicated that the proposed rule was fine in their eyes, and happy to turn it back to you for any public comment.
Great. Well, Mark and legal and HSF and everyone else who worked on it, thank you very much for endeavoring to do this. There had been some historical BISHCA language in the rule that was poorly drafted and it needed some revision, I think, ultimately in hindsight. So I appreciate you guys taking that on and reflecting the changes from the legislation this year to be in our rule. So I greatly appreciate it, and the draft rule looks really great to me. I have no questions, but I'll open up for any board member questions or comments.
I don't have any comments. I thought the rule looked fantastic. Thank you for doing that work. Can you just describe to me a little bit the December to April rulemaking process? Just refresh what that looks like.
Yeah, so it is a little bit, there are a lot of steps, let's put it that way. It's a very exhaustive process, which is good. The process is that if the board votes on approving a draft rule, that proposed rule goes to the Interagency Committee on Administrative Rules, and that committee recommends or makes a number of changes to the full application that the GMCB submits that includes information about soliciting additional public feedback and other matters. The rule then goes to the Secretary of State. Notice of the proposed rule is sent out in newspapers of record across the state, and then this proposed rule would actually come back to the board for another meeting. I'm guessing in February, maybe early March, and that would be an opportunity for additional public feedback and an opportunity for any revisions to the rule. So the board will have another chance to look at the rule, decide it based on public feedback if there's anything it wants changed or revised. And then from that point, the rule goes to the Legislative Committee on Administrative Rules, which has a review process as well. And then the end result is that the rule finishes with getting adopted and then becomes effective approximately 2 weeks after that. So it's a months-long process, but really for the board, the only part that is really centrally before the board is going to be that late February, maybe early March, when it comes back for another review and for more public comment.
And just a follow-up question, if it comes back to the board in February and there are revisions or, more public input, does it kick back? The original process starts again?
No, the process
okay.
is designed to allow for revisions to really make the rule as strong as possible. Yeah.
Great. Okay. Thank you.
Unless there's any other board member comment or question, I'll turn it to public comment. You raise the hand. Mr. Del Trecco, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you, Chair Foster, and good afternoon, members. Mark, nice job on walking through that slides. I really appreciate it. So thanks for the opportunity to provide some public comment. And again, just to repeat myself, I want to acknowledge what Mark went through. Looked really simple and easy, but there's a lot of work and difficult process that goes into that. So thanks. And second to that, I want to acknowledge some of the flexibility offered in the exemption section for hospitals. So with that, this information, as pointed out, just recently came out. So I'll just provide some high-level feedback and we'll follow up with some written comment. My comments today are based on some objectives that I think matches and creates a process to the environment we're operating in today. And I believe the underpinnings of this rule should be to create year-to-year predictability, the opportunity to develop multi-year planning and flexibility that may be necessary for transformation, a definition for affordability, and stabilization for our hospitals. I firmly believe that these objectives more closely align with Act 68, and as it's currently redrafted, we may not be capitalizing on all the opportunities to modernize this rule to match our efforts underway here in Vermont, which I'm really optimistic about, by the way. So to improve predictability, I think we should collectively work together to develop the benchmarks and metrics referred to in section 3.203 and 3.204, which clearly are the driving decision makers around budget decisions, mid-year adjustments, and enforcement. Setting these measures should be transparent and a thoughtful process. And Mark, I know you addressed this, but I think it should include VAS members and the HCA. As written, I think the annual adjustment of these measures may limit the predictability and planning opportunities required as we move forward. VAS expertise should not be eliminated, and it's not clear what obtaining hospital input entails. In section 3.301 definitions, Mark, you spoke to the significant deviation, and I'll just read the definition. Significant deviation is defined as an actual year-end budget performance as measured by net patient revenue, commercial net patient revenue, or other metric that is higher than the established limit written in the budget decision. The specific metric and threshold constituting a significant deviation shall be defined each year in the hospital budget guidance. I think this definition lacks flexibility and clarity. I believe deviation to take into consideration types of hospitals, transformation efforts, affordability, and again, hospital stabilization. In section 3.305, the review process, several areas have been redlined out, such as utilization, prior year performance, and public comments, to name a few. As we begin to regionalize or change where services are delivered, how will the board consider utilization and changes tied to transformation? One area not contemplated in this section, but you did speak to it, is the timing of enforcement as it's related to budget review. In the past couple of years, enforcement and budget review largely occurred at the same time. And I think a suggestion that I'd make is they should be at different timing, which would allow hospitals to build their budgets with known enforcement decisions on the front end. I think that's been a little tricky for everybody involved. In section 3.306, the establishment of budget decisions and the timing of the rule appear to be slightly out of alignment. Hospitals will be submitting budgets simultaneously as this rule might go into effect. And I'm not sure if that creates problems, but I think there's areas where it might be fairly confusing. And I think there's an opportunity when updating this to implement the reconsideration process, which is outlined in 18 VSA subsection 9381. In section 3.401, mid-year review, the mid-year review is based on significant variance, which is defined as a year-end measurement. So I'm not sure how a year-end measurement applies to a mid-year review. Also, specifically in section D of that review, which you spoke to, appears to be targeting the reduction or the constraint of commercial rate for, when I read this, basically any reason. All budgets have limitations, one example being seasonality. One opportunity would be to broaden this to consider transformation, market share adjustments, utilization changes, and the recapture of market share from out of state. I think that's good for keeping care local, and it also promotes economic prosperity. There's a lot here, and I'm just digesting this. I think the efforts to align with Act 68 and where we are today is really important. I think modernizing this to meet the moment is what we should be doing. I think we need to create more flexibility, more predictability in this process. And I think we can probably do a better job moving forward, both as we submit budgets and as we review budgets. So thank you for the opportunity, and I appreciate the time.
Thank you for your comments, Mr. Del Cecco. Do you by chance have that written out, or could you send us your comments in writing? So I took notes, but it's helpful to see it all together.
Yeah, Chair Foster and Ward and Mark and team, we will certainly provide written comment.
Thank you so much. And thanks for the thoughtful comments. Any other public comment? Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Henksler. We appreciate the work on this very much. Next, we've also noticed a potential executive session. There's a statute requiring the board to have a for-cause removal process. Currently, the Green Mountain Care Board does not have an established rule addressing removal of Green Mountain Care Board members. So we've been working with our council to review the statute and the requirements and potential rulemaking associated with that. However, it's attorney-client privileged communications. I would like to discuss this with our council and the board. And accordingly, I move to make a finding that premature general public knowledge of confidential attorney-client communications relating to a potential rule addressing Green Mountain Care Board member for-cause removal would clearly place the board at a substantial disadvantage.
Second.
All in favor of the motion, say aye.
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 Aye. Motion carries. And second, I move that we enter into executive session pursuant to 1 VSA 313A1F for the purpose of seeking counsel from the Green Mountain Care Board's attorney staff relating to the Green Mountain Care Board member for-cause removal statute and potential related Green Mountain Care Board rulemaking. Attendance at the executive session will include the board members, Green Mountain Care Board counsel, and any other necessary Green Mountain Care Board staff.
May the public interrupt, please?
Oh, let me finish the motions, please, and then I can take other public comment. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second.
Okay, all in favor of the motion, say aye.
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 Aye. And the motion carries. I do see that there are a couple hands. For some reason, I can't see the names. It looks like Anna McCloy, Dr. McCloy.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chairman Foster and members of the board. I am hoping that you may permit a brief comment on a new notice of service reduction at Rutland Regional, given its time sensitive nature, but I also I do not have experience attending Green Mountain Care Board meetings, so I am also happy to do this a little later in the meeting if it feels more appropriate.
We don't have the Rutland Notice of Service Line Reduction notice for today, but we have received a very large volume of comment, and I think it's appropriate that if you took the time to be here today, that we also hear from you. So we can
Okay.
hear any public comment on that people would like, and then I'll move to executive session so you guys don't have to wait.
Okay, so now is a good time. Okay.
Please, yeah.
Again, thank you so much, Chairman Foster and members of the board. My name is Anna McCloy. I'm a board certified pediatrician, and I've practiced in Rutland for the last 13 years. I'm a primary care pediatrician with Community Health Pediatrics and a pediatric hospitalist at Rutland Regional Medical Center. On October 29th, Rutland Regional Medical Center abruptly announced that they will close the pediatric inpatient unit in late December of this year. We understand that Rutland Regional worked on this decision for approximately 6 months, never informing the pediatricians of a planned change in our service line. While we understand that community hospitals are facing extenuating fiscal realities, this decision, made without transparent, thoughtful, or comprehensive planning, lacks humanistic consideration and will gravely affect the youngest and the sickest children in our area. It has broader potential implications for the health and the economic stability of our already under-resourced area. Though this change may save our hospital some money, it will be costly for Vermont's health system and the state as a whole. The administration's loosely knit concept, including boarding children in the emergency room for 24-hour time periods, increasing transports to tertiary care, and euphemistic language claiming that nurses who have specialized pediatric skill sets will be assigned elsewhere in the hospital, is abhorrent. These ill-developed ideas are antithetical to the capability, the comfort, and the calm that we know provides healing. RRMC's leadership has told us that alternatives were explored, though we cannot know what was assessed due to our exclusion from those conversations. They have prepared their submission over months of time with the luxury of administrative, statistical, and legal support. We, the pediatricians, have had 7 trying days to take stock of the situation and to try to get to the point of meeting with you today. We cannot play hardball with Rutland Regional Medical Center regarding the numbers. Our job is to care for infants and children. However, we are concerned that the numbers presented by the hospital leadership to the Green Mountain Care Board, to Rutland Regional Medical Center's Board of Directors, and to us were derived from data with bias towards their agenda. We acknowledge that pediatrics is not a revenue-generating specialty, but the value to the children we care for, their families, our community, and the state is undeniable. We understand that any hospital with plans to reduce or eliminate service in order to comply with budgetary orders must give 45 days written notice. We are asking for your thoughtful and objective review of the situation. We need more time. If the reality is that pediatric inpatient care in Rutland must be reimagined, we may only get one chance to get this right. If we don't, we will lose staff with specialized pediatric skill sets, we will lose community trust, and we won't be able to go back. Thank you so much for your time and attention. That's all I have for today.
Thank you very much, Dr. McCloy, for those comments and for making the time to share them with us. I see another comment, Eva Mayer.
Yes, hi, this is Dr. Eva Meyer. I'm a general pediatrician. I just wanted to stand in solidarity with Dr. McCloy. I'm so afraid that so many of our patients utilize the emergency room and are admitted, and they will get hurt.
Thank you very much for your comment. Stephen Wood.
Hi, thanks for meeting us with us today. I'm Stephen Wood. I'm been working at Rutland for 24 years now, prior to having any gray hair. So been at this for a little while, and stand with Anna and our colleagues uniformly on this. We were pretty blindsided, and we really feel unanimous in opposition to the current proposal to reduce and relocate the inpatient pediatrics to a 24-hour stint to the ED is just not adequate and appropriate, and is not a good alternative to inpatient care here. And we strongly believe that this makes is very deleterious to our population and makes central Vermont a veritable desert for adequate hospital care for our children. Thank you for listening to us.
Thank you for speaking up. I will say it's been an incredible volume of people sending in public comments. We get public comments on thorny and difficult issues every day, but the volume and quality of the submissions on this particular issue have been really significant and impressive. Dr. Mara Fox.
Hello, everyone. I'm Rebecca Mary Fox. I'm also a general pediatrician and pediatric hospitalist here at Rutland, Vermont. Also, thank you for taking the time to hear our comments today. We much appreciate it. I would echo the sentiment of my colleagues that not only do we feel that this will harm patients, but I also have pretty grave financial concerns about how this decision will affect the financial healthcare costs all over Vermont. You know, we do have a relatively small number of admissions, you know, anywhere from 250 to 300 admissions a year locally of children. However, trying to transport those patients either across state line to Dartmouth or up to UVM to receive the care that they need is going to strain our already strained transportation services. It is already difficult to find ambulances to take patients where they need to go. And I worry that that'll affect not just our pediatric population, but also our adult population who require on those services for transport. Not to mention the cost. I worry about increasing overall costs to our healthcare system, which we know is already strained. You know, I appreciate Rutland's financial concerns, and we all want the hospital to stay financially solvent. But I feel like the service line reduction and patient care reduction is not the decision that will ultimately make or break their budget, but it will make or break the pediatric care in our community.
Thank you, Dr. Mara Fox. Any other public comments at this time? And our public comment period on this will remain open, and the board's process has not even really initiated. We just received the notice, I think, last week. So there will be more opportunity to provide feedback and comments. I will just say two things. There are going to be service line reductions in this state. They're going to happen. And that was pretty widely known in 2022, if not 2019, 2023, and then the Oliver Wyman report identified the significant financial challenges the state has, and that means there will be changes. One really positive thing is the state has taken a lot of investment and time to try and put in structures and resources for the state to make determinations as to how to prioritize the care so that the hospitals are sustainable and we don't lose particular types of essential services and care in communities. I don't know that there will be any that people will like, but we want to make sure that the state prioritizes so that care is not suffering and access is not suffering. The legislature in Act 51 and Act, I think it was 68 of last year, appropriated resources and directed legislatively authority to make that planning through the Agency of Human Services, which really leads policy in healthcare in Vermont. It is the healthcare policy reform arm for the state, and the board is the regulator. And so a lot of these comments, I hope you can also direct to them as they are leading the transformation work. And the board last year was given authority to do service line reduction review. For any people here, we can try and get you the policy that the board put together to comply with the statute. The statute requires us to review not every service line reduction, but service line reductions that are made to comply with the Green Mountain Care Board budget order, and also where they're inconsistent with the AHS transformation work. So if those two criteria are met, or not met rather, the board can conduct a review process. If they are met, then the board would not conduct a review process. So we are looking at this right now, currently, today, this morning, yesterday, tomorrow, to kind of make some of the determinations as to whether or not this one would trigger review. And we'll be in communication with our colleagues at AHS as to whether or not this is consistent with their transformation thinking and planning. But I do encourage people to also make sure they reach out to the transformation team and arm at the Agency of Human Services. And with that, we have a motion to go to executive session, and I will move that we recess this session and move to executive session. I anticipate we'll probably be in executive session to maybe 2:45. For any members of the public that are watching, I do not anticipate any substantive care board business after the executive session. You're welcome to stay, welcome to come back, but I don't anticipate we'll have anything other than closing out this hearing. And so with that, we will take a recess and go to executive session. Thank you. Okay, we can resume our hearing of November 5th. The board has completed its executive session. Is there any public comment today? Any other public comment today? Any new or old business? And I move to adjourn the hearing.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. We're adjourned. Have a nice afternoon.